Okay. And once again, I want to welcome all the folks who are here with us from farther away. It's really nice to have them and neighbors and Rabbi Bronstein. You know, we all know how living in Scarsdale is so edifying. It's hard to believe it's the same town in some ways as the town that this sermon was originally delivered in. But I was thinking about my blessed week, which included last Monday, an Eid celebration that we hosted in the Great Hall. On Thursday, I went to the Women's Seder at Westchester Reformed Temple, and then today we're doing this. And I feel so blessed to live in Westchester in the area that we do. And we do all those things in the course of a week, and to reflect on how different, how far we've come, right, as a community here at St. James, here in Scarsdale and in Westchester, and just in general, since 1961. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to John.
Okay, I'm a teacher. I have a teacher once, or yeah.
And I'll be protecting the side part of that, but
okay. So to be clear, I've been asked to do a lecture. So thank you, Mother.
you're so welcome.
So my name is John McNally. I just want to introduce myself. I know many of you. I am in no means qualified for this. I'm not a historian. I do teach history. I am a member of the parish for about 12 years or so. I have been a member of the vestry. What I can say is that I love history, and I love this parish. I really, as Asher was saying, I do feel blessed to live here, and to be with all of you, and the community here is incredible. That being said, this is a very even today sermon, just reading it as a parishioner, there is a lot of weight and emotion here. I am not trying to pass judgment, or it's people who lived it. I am asking if we'll have points where we'll stop and we'll open it up to people here on Zoom who are some former parishioners, some who actually were here at the time of the sermon. I think as an amateur historian, I think having those actual anecdotes, those real connections, make for a story. And so before I begin, I just want to also introduce Tom Quirk. Tom is a former resident of Scarsdale, local historian, spent about 5 years on this specific incident and its ramifications, really getting down to what happened. About 90% of this comes from his blog. So I just want to give credit. I've also learned that. Give credit as a historian. I've done a few days of research. Tom did 5 years. And so really fortunate to have Tom here to correct anything and again, give more context to what is going on. I also, as a teacher, have about 2 hours of, I could just talk myself and do a lecture, but that's not what it's going to go. So we're going to be a little flexible here. And so we'll see where it goes. But I will do my best. You'll keep me honest with time. So to get everyone out. And if you have to leave, please leave. Do not feel, again, I teach middle school. I'm used to lots of movement and I will not take, any offense.
You don't have to ask if you need to use the restroom.
And so I just, Jeff Kempsell is on here, and I know Jeff is the son of Father Kempsell, and he was 10 at the time. He lived it, and I can't imagine being a 10-year-old, and we'll talk about kind of what happened to the Kempsell family and having to be sort of displaced, and so we'll open up, and I hope Jeff does share some of his, and then also Marianne McKay is here as well. She was in the junior choir here actually at the sermon. She was 12 years old at the time. So, again, we'll have times during this where we can open it up, and I just love to hear kind of what it was like to be here and just add to the story, add to the to the context. So I guess we'll start.
Yep.
So I just wanted, this is a, one of, I think, 5 or so historical lectures. The last one was, Russell Grant, and it went up to, the 1930s, 1940s. So I just want to sort of pick up where Russell left off, so, not even touch the highball yet. It's quick 2 slides just to get some of what's going on at St. James at the time, because it actually is quite interesting, and it also made national news as well. So do we have a clicker or something or no?
No, that's me.
Okay. Okay, so we'll just go to the next slide. All right, so January 20th, 1952, it is the dedication of the cloister, the hallway that connects the church to the parish hall. And we've talked about this before, but the cloister is just one hallway, but they're actually underground is where the nursery school is today. So classrooms underground, there's the ISOM room, which also serves as a classroom, plus the library above. The offices all were added. I just want to give you an understanding of how large the church was. They were added because of Christian education classrooms. So there was no nursery school, but that's how large the Christian education program was in the 1940s. Going into the 50s, that the church decided to expand in all these classrooms, plus the kitchen, and it was done on time and under budget, which is also really a miracle, really, if you think about it. This is from Louise Clark's book, and also I use that heavily. I don't have the page, again, I would mark that off if I was grading a history paper, but I did my best. But what she said was the feeling of exhilaration for the 100th anniversary, the feeling of exhilaration without any thought of the tensions beneath the surface. So all throughout, if you're reading the parish messengers, which I was, and you probably aren't, there is a lot of conflict between high and low church. St. James was a high church. Father Price, who was very dedicated to Christian education. He was a very formal rector. In fact, even the calling of the priest father was controversial. The light, and what is the name of the light? I apologize.
The sanctuary.
The
candle, or vigil light.
The vigil light is also
Altar.
one that was controversial. Was that perpetual light that's lit there? Was also one that was indicative of a very formal, thank you, service. And there was tension there. Even before this happens, parishioners are leaving and going to a low church, more informal, St. Joseph of Arimathea in White Plains. And so there is sort of a tension underneath the surface. Also, Father Kernan, who is the rector in charge, the priest in charge as the assistant rector, was very public, even running for the school board. And so there was some sort of tension there, really anti-communist zeal going on. So you can. Oh, wait 1 second, actually. So here is a picture of the, if you go back actually one, sorry.
Back. Yep.
Here's a picture of the church under construction, the cloister under construction. This is James Flood was the sexton. And in Louise Clark's book, she actually points to the sextons as being a source of stability and continuity. After 12 rectors, there were actually 4 sextons. So James Flood was very beloved and served up into the 70s. But this is a picture of him in the 50s with Bishop Donegan. And so really hard to imagine today, but within the course of a year, Father Kernan, the assistant rector, Father Price, who had been here for his entire duration of priesthood, all left, and then plus Miss Jean Miller, Miss Miller of the church house, they called her, who had been here for over 20 years. They all left and moved to the Roman Catholic Church. So within 1 year. And so it was a really incredible time of the people. People, I think, were, again, sort of had lots of questions. I didn't live it, I don't know it, but I can just imagine sort of losing all that. I've only been through one rector search, and it was in itself like really powerful and took a long time. So to have this many people who were fixtures at this church leave, I think it really sort of was was a wound that took a while to heal. Also in the New York Herald Tribune, Scarsdale rector quits to become Catholic. Gotta love the headlines. This is again national. It is on the national news. Although the Times back then did cover a lot of local news, so a lot of them are in like the page 20 or so, but a lot of these are out and about, and it's actually quite interesting. You had a question?
Several leaders of St. James joined the Catholic Church. Ms. G. Miller, Mary's father Price. Now, I know you can do that in the Episcopal Church, but that doesn't apply in the Catholic Church.
I can answer that.
Can you say-
They did, Father Price did leave to become Catholic and Jean did too. But they were a couple and could not get married in the Catholic Church because Father Price had been divorced back in like 1948. And so they,
Oh, so he wasn't a
yeah,
priest.
he ended up becoming Eastern Orthodox.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm just listening in.
That's why we have Tom work here.
Ah,
No,
Oh.
neither was Father Kernan. They
Okay.
left, they could not be because they.
John McNally.
Many children.
We have-
He was married with children. So
Some-
he couldn't.
Right.
Someone online would like to speak. Didn't,
Oh, okay, someone's gonna give us even more.
Yes. Is that Marianne wanted to speak or?
No,
no, okay, okay.
Okay. So I just wanted to point this out in terms of the upheaval going on. And then I guess we can do the next slide. Into this comes the rector in charge, Father George Kempsell. He's 31 years old and has quite young, and he is sort of put in this position, and I'm sure was excited, but it was a lot to take on as a young priest and with a new family. And so this is rector in Scarsdale installed by Bishop. What's interesting, if you actually I can just hit it here. If you look at the parish messengers at the time, there's not much there at all about this. And I mean, I guess I understand that, but as a historian, it's sort of frustrating. You're looking for that, like that juicy quote or something, and really there's not much there. What's interesting here is that Bishop Donegan gave his sermon to the New York Times, and the New York Times published it, and it just sort of highlights we as Episcopals treasure our spiritual freedom and Anglicanism, which the Roman Catholic Church does not have. The Episcopal Church is democratic because it requires that the laity elect the rector, who then must be approved by the bishop. And so I believe Father Price took exception to
Yeah,
this.
I know Kernan did too. They kind of fired back about why the Catholic Church was.
And I think there's a lot of it is the idea that the lack of authority in particularly in the rectors and the dogma, it just wasn't there. It was too up for interpretation. I think that was sort of the underlying issue with Kernan and Price for the reasons for leaving the Episcopal Church. But these are fighting words, essentially, like on the New York Times at the time. So this is again in the New York Times, October 12th, 1953, when Father Kempsell does come on. So Father Kempsell, Reverend George F. Kempsell, I think had a definitely different approach than Father Price. Father Price was, again, a very dedicated priest, very much going back to education, to the scripture, and I think quite strict, was really adamant about particularly the children being here for church. As Russell ran last lecture, he really talked about the fact that it was about a 91% attendance rate for religious education.
House.
And it would come to your house. So that's Price. Father Kempsell had sort of it seems like a different meaning. It was much more sort of warm and maybe open, less sort of fear, more more welcoming with open arms.
Tell him to shut up.
What's that?
Tell him to shut up.
Okay, hang on, I don't know what that is, I'm not sure. I'm having Andrew, could you come here for a second? I hid my screen.
Don't do it. You'll embarrass.
Okay, hang on. I don't know who that is. I'm just trying to find the screen. Okay, I'll find
What?
it. I'm muted. Go ahead, John, keep going.
Close every window.
Please tell him to be quiet.
Really, I lost
So,
the screen.
uh,
I pressed
So
something and I don't know what.
Actually, and see if anyone had any memories.
I lost
of
John's
people who wanted to share, people
Here,
who were
I see it here.
at the time,
Where?
Is it, where is it?
It's not here. I
about
hit
one-
something that made it disappear.
I-
In an hour.
What was
So that's
Open it
a
up again.
place in the Paris Messenger, which was
Hang on.
essentially like the Scarlet on Fire, which used to be the local newspaper, but it was published throughout. It actually made money for a time, but it had a place for the rector to give his sort of take on issues of the day. And so this was taken from Father Kempsell in 59, and these are some of the quotes here. And it sort of gives at least a flavor of who he was. But again, I don't know if anyone wants to share any memories of Father. I can, absolutely.
Mhm.
Sort of,
There we go.
and then if you can just X.
Uh-huh.
So, Father Kempsell from the rector's word 6 years ago, I was instituted by Bishop Donovan as the 12th rector of our beloved St. James the Less. As your rector, I've been the recipient of so much kindness and so much gracious hospitality. My life has become more meaningful in these last several years. And again, just in terms of the numbers, so 218 infants and adults baptized, 267 boys, girls, men, women confirmed.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
In the 6 years. It's a lot. So it's definitely a lot. And again, I think just the tone and the joy there and the love there is, I think says a lot.
Next.
Any other? Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
This is from actually Tom Law. I thought it was interesting. It's from a Bill Stott. He wrote essentially, I think he's talking to Jeff. They were on like a conversation. I just kind of pulled it. Your father was a great person, though not a communicant of his church. I participated in St. James the Less Nativity play, still going on today. In 1959, 1960 as Herod. And he remembers Jill, a Roman Catholic, saying, "I wish my church could have priests like Father Kempsell." And so one, the mime, the nativity plays, these were large productions and brought youth from different denominations here. I also thought this was sort of interesting. I didn't want to lose this. This is a letter from the comptroller to Queen Elizabeth that she actually had read one of the Paris messengers and wanted the comptroller to give a letter back to say how much Queen Elizabeth enjoyed reading the Paris Messenger, which I thought is the Queen Mother quite a readership for the Paris Messenger. So something to shoot for going forward. And Father Kempsell also, I mean, he in addition to being a father, he was an active tennis player. He was very much a gifted musician. He was a member of and eventually the president of the Orchestral Society of Westchester, and also water skied, which shows up in the New York Times for some reason. But he was a real person. He was I think quite the leader and very much beloved. So again, I just wanted to sort of what was going on for me was really what is the timeline of all these events that happened. So that was 1959. It was the fall of 1959. The rector's word. And so this is 1 year later, and this is the Holly Ball going on a Scarsdale Golf Club. This was the 1960 Holly Ball, was the 7th annual Holly Ball. And it's essentially like in the Catholic Church, it's a cotillion, it's a coming out party, and these are older girls, now women. This is like they're to womanhood, they're 17, 18, 19 years old, and they and it was quite important at that time. And even I went to West Point, and I know West Point
Like,
full and flow these dates, to these balls, even when I was there, when I was in the late nineties, the late nineties, they would still do this. So this was in Scarsdale Golf Club. This is an actual picture. We'll see the Life magazine layout. But this is, these were the girls actually at that volleyball. So these were the girls / women of the volleyball. I don't know that maybe you do, Tom. When did Ruth, so, the two people we're talking about now is really, Pam Nottage.
There was a T for debutantes that was covered in the Inquirer. There was a T for debutantes that was covered in the Inquirer. It might have been covered in the Times, I don't remember. But it was at that T. Pam Nottage went, her mom really wanted her to do it. So she was doing it more for her mom. And she went to the T. And there was some scuttlebutt at the T, like, oh, you're going out with Michael Ernstad. We don't really think he would be appropriate.
this is your son talking.
For the ball. And when Pam told her mother, like, they don't want Michael there, I'm not going. He's my boyfriend, and I want to
They
spend.
didn't really let him start though.
So there was a call from Mrs. Kraft, who was on the volleyball committee. And she said it's not acceptable on racial grounds because he's Jewish, because he had a Jewish father. And what was tough about that, Pam was just like, fine, I'm not going, that's it. And what was strange about it, Michael said later when he was interviewed about this, was that he was not raised with any religion. His mother was Catholic, his father was Jewish, and so they wanted the kids, they had 3 sons, each son was supposed to choose his own faith. And Michael, from an early age, was going to Christian churches. He went with some neighbors to Lents, to a church in White Plains, and then he came here when he was around high school age. He was baptized by father. So he'd always considered himself a Christian.
So, and we'll talk more about Pam and Michael in a second, based on Tom's research. But so December 27th, it's a Tuesday. That's the date of the volleyball. January 1st, the parishioner informed Father Kempsell that one of his parishioners was not allowed at the volleyball. And again, just a point, it wasn't Michael or Pam, so it wasn't the two people actually involved. It was another parishioner who did come forward, and then that was New Year's Day service, and then 1 week later was the sermon. So that was the sermon we just read, where Father Kempsell excommunicated the members who were either part of or supported this decision to not allow Michael Ernstad to attend the volleyball. January 13th, just so we get some about to see the article. January 13th is the first article. It was actually, so it's front page, not in the 20s. This is front page article below the fold, but still front page, and we'll look at that article now. And so this is the segment from the front page. Scarsdale, if we can get the headline. There.
Mhm. Oh,
Wait,
yep.
okay. Thank you. Scarsdale Parish Rector limits communion over anti-Semitism. And so youth who is convert from Judaism barred as escort to country club dance. Yes, did you have? Okay, sorry. And so this was the first article, and then it sort of took off from there. And a few things I just wanted to highlight, Tom, you can help me out here. I just wanted to sort of point out that, again, like the sermon, Father Kempsell does essentially say, hey, here's where I do get the authority to do this. And it is from the Book of Common Prayer. And essentially, if among, this is from the Book of Common Prayer in terms of priests giving communion, if among those who come to be partakers of the Holy Communion, the minister shall know any to have done any wrong to his neighbors by word or deed, so that the congregation may be thereby offended, he shall advertise him that he presumed not to come to the Lord's table until he had openly declared himself to have truly repented and amended his former evil life. So again, and also as Astrid said in the sermon today, not very usual, but certainly within the power of the rector to do. Bishop Donovan was very much in support. I believe that they were in communication throughout this entire process of research and figuring out what to do. And then I just wanted, if you hit the next piece, this is also from the AP, the Associated Press, the Right Reverend Arthur C. Lichtenberger. He's the head of the Protestant Episcopal Church. So this went all the way up to the head of the Episcopal Church. Father Lichtenberger was very much in support. The Right Reverend Lichtenberger was in support of Father Kempsell's decision to do this. And I think just one more, and Tom, maybe you have something to add about this, but it's not in the sermon, but I just want about the second class Christian. And so I think what
He said it like when he was interviewed there, it's in one of the interviews he did, like, because he got calls from all these, it was in Newsweek and Time, I think it was in Newsweek or Time, where he said there's no such thing as a second class Christian. And that really, it became a story about anti-Semitism, and that's kind of what people picked up on. But within this church, it's like, you're literally saying that this parishioner is not quite equal to the rest of you based on his dad. You know, it's like, and actually, it was Mrs. Kraft's daughter, who's Carol. Carol, I believe her married name is Carol Schaefer, but Carol Ann Kraft Schaefer. I had a great talk with her, and she was friends with Michael. She had given him driving lessons, and I'm sorry, she had given him a haircut and he had given her driving lessons. So they were friends, and Mrs. Kraft was kind of pushed into calling, and she's the one who said unfit on racial grounds. And so that made it, you know, took it to, you know, it was just a terrible, awful thing. But within the church, you can't say, oh, well, this person's more Christian. And once you're baptized, we're all in it together. We're all equal. And so, and I believe Jeff really pointed that when we had our phone call, Jeff, years ago, you pointed that out. And that there was nothing that he was going to do. Like once this happened, there was no question about what he was going to do. So.
Is there a biblical basis for refusing communion to somebody, or is that a?
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah.
so the not biblical, but in the Episcopal Church, the Book of Common Prayer.
Bad.
I have a lot of priests in the audience. I'm just going to defer.
Hey, Sharon, you can speak. Yeah. I mean, you can certainly point to passages in Paul's letters on which some of these practices are based, but Sharon's right. It's really that rubric is canonical status for us.
And yes.
Is the fact that he's like a very Christian and a member of this marriage significant about Kempsell? If you were practicing Judaism, or the other
That's that's a good. I don't know that he would have acted, though. I think it was because it was a member of his marriage. But it also
The question was sort of a question is if Michael Ernstett was Jewish and not a member of this parish, would Father Kempsell's would Father Kempsell's reaction been quite so public, so open? And then Tom had, and again,
this was a thing. The previous rector, James Harry Price, would not use the membership to the club because he knew they were exclusionary. So But I know Father Kempsell wanted to work with the club to change their policy. He said he didn't approve of it. And back then, this is like, I learned so much about context and the way how things are different in society at different times. I mean, back then, I feel terrible saying this, but it's like people had a right to be a bigot. And it was seen as like, George Sokolowski was a big, I would say, right-wing, anti-communist columnist who was, widely read. And he reflected on this volleyball incident, and he said, well, what if, he goes, I think, anyone should marry whoever they want, but what about the older generation? You could break up families if he goes, that's something to consider. What if your parent is a bigot? What are you gonna do? And, this is like what this incident kind of percolated. And I will say that Father Kempsell embraced his role as as someone who had spoken up for civil rights. And that's why I call my 47-page article, I call it Costly Grace, because he paid a price for that. He was popular with one section of people, but they weren't necessarily all in this church. And it just disrupted the status quo at the golf club and here. I mean, the Nottages paid a price. They were excluded at the club, like Mrs. Nottage.
Well, they were, in the Times.
Yeah, they supported Father. They go, this is great. He's a true man of God, and this was a great sermon, and we agree 100,000%. They really loved Michael. He was very much someone who needed parenting. He was a kid who lived in a big mansion. His parents lived in the city because his father was much older, and he just there were servants there and stuff, but he did not have a lot of parental guidance, and they loved him, and they felt terrible about what happened. But because they supported Father Kempsell in the paper, they were ostracized. Like Mrs. Nottage couldn't play bridge with the other ladies at the club for like a year. She actually had a heart attack because she'd been, under a lot of pressure, because she got a lot of fire. They were seen as like people who were shaking things up and making things, giving the town and the club a bad name.
Sure. I just wanted to give some context. So, to be clear, I took this from Tom's blog, who took it from Carol O'Connor's History of Scarsdale, a sort of utopia.
Yeah.
And so, just to give some context, this is a book that does talk about sort of the social dynamics and religious dynamics of Scarsdale at the time. And so, according to Connor, the town was socially hostile to Jews, despite a large Jewish population, even around 1960. Scarsdale's demographic, this is from the book, changed demographically dramatically between 1940 and 1960. The author, Carol O'Connor, estimates that by 1960, Scarsdale was 42% Protestant, 35% Jewish, 18% Catholic. What's interesting is that, and again, a lot of this is from Tom's book, but also Virginia and from Gene Peterson. Was interesting is the schools were still Scarsdale schools. That's why people moved here. And so the schools were integrated, and you would play on the same chess team. You'd play football together, and you'd be in the school together, but your parents would never, ever socialize together. You had very separate, whether it was clubs or just dinner parties. There was this exclusion that was very much accepted at the time. And so this, again, is sort of kicking that nest and saying, something's wrong, that something is not right here. And Tom really articulates this in his blog and saying that the kids were, this is about 20 years. Right now, these kids are 17, 18. They're starting to date. They're starting to get to know each other. And it's the kids who are gonna it's gonna come to a head, and often it's gonna be the kids who are like, this is stupid. Like, I love this person. I know this person. I don't care, how they worship. And there was a real sort of difference between the older generations and the children at the time. I just want to pause to see if there's anyone of any. And on Zoom, anyone have, or they can do like I don't know if anyone has, or they can put like a hand up or something.
Yep. Keep going, and I'll stop you if there is.
Okay. And so Yeah, they can put a hand up or
Mhm,
made a chat.
And
And then if students go to the next slide. So this is Pam, not mentioned, and Michael Ernstad, so pictures of Pam and Michael that were in Life magazine. And we'll see the full spread in a second, but their names and images were out there. They did not come forward, they didn't bring this to the public. And they were out there and they had to deal with the repercussions. I believe Pam was at Middlebury when this was going on.
She went to lunch and they were like, the people like, hey, you should go look at the newspaper. Like she was like, it was the first she heard about it.
Yeah, so, again, they did not, come forth, it was, one of their friends who did, and they were sort of swept up in this. And I just had a few quotes here. Pam about Michael, he was at the club, Starsdale Golf Club, more than I was, often playing golf with friends, and so the idea, and people in your comments, say, oh no, I have Jewish friends come all the time to the club, it just sort of.
It was like, because it was the every time fall.
This was the coming out, this is then coming out in society, that they, who they were with, kind of needed a certain status. Yes, Virginia.
I think it's also more than just.
Recording in progress.
I grew up in Scarsdale, went to, all the school had. Eric Rothschild, if anybody's familiar with him, as my physical history teacher, and as a adult, became an historian in so many years, yeah. But what I wanted to say is that it wasn't just that these young women were coming out, but particularly to the parents, this was an opportunity for them to meet the right possible marriage mate. This wasn't just a party. It wasn't just hanging out at a maternity dance. It was serious business. And so this took on a different kind of significance to some of the parents who thought it should be, not all.
And I think what comes out of, thank you very much, what comes out here and reading about this researching is the real tension between sort of old money, new money, the Protestant power that isn't power that runs the town, town club that runs the, makes the decisions in here, and then the influx of, wealthy Jewish, citizens of Scarsdale, and there is a tension there, so it's not just the old new money, but it also is, religious as well, which is, again, it's very, very weighty. I mean, as a historian, it's interesting to sort of look at, but it is quite a challenging topic. I just wanted to highlight here, so, this is from Pam. I wasn't trying to make a civil rights stand or anything. I just wanted to spend Christmas holiday with my boyfriend, as Tom said. And again, Michael's parents were really out of the picture. They were living in the city. Father was like almost like an oil tycoon.
Yeah, he was like in his 50, maybe even 60 when Michael was born. His wife was younger, and they just, Michael was very much, raised by,
By
a
his
very
parents.
wealthy family. There were servants there, and Michael just kind of had, this is one reason he started going to church. Everyone went to church or synagogue. Everyone went. That was something President Eisenhower said when he was inaugurated. Everyone, as part of the battle against communism, everyone must worship somewhere, anywhere. And all the kids were going, and so he had nothing to do on Sunday. His mother brought him around and asked the neighbors, the Lents, to bring him to their church so he could be with people. Because at that point, her husband was older and needed to be in the city. And because he was still working, he was very wealthy. He was an oil man and very interesting life. And he'd lived in Scarsdale in a very large mansion. But the kids called him the old Jew on the hill. He had a giant mansion during the Great Depression, and he had servants out polishing the Cadillac tires. So it was like the whole thing.
And yet Michael did not have a good relationship with him because he didn't really know him, you know. He was-
We're just running sidewalk, you're joining.
Okay.
And
You know, Michael's comments are very interesting, I thought, like, I was,
so again, stolen directly from Tom's blog. So Tom, do you want to read can you read it, or?
Michael's response.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was actually interviewed by the Herald Review, a Hearst paper, got hold of him out in Colorado in Boulder, and because that's where he was going to college. And he said, I bear no grudges against those country club people. Some of my best friends are members. I would be discriminating myself if I had any hard feelings. I've learned to live with this kind of thing. Anybody with a Jewish parent does. And that's like kind of social exclusion or judgment or hostility was very prevalent. There was a movie with Gregory Peck. They're terrible. Gentlemen's Agreement, that's right. And it was about this kind of thing. It was all of them. And Gregory Peck goes undercover pretending to be a Jewish man, and he starts getting excluded for that thing. And that's what it was about.
Okay. So do
Next screen.
yeah. Next slide. So this is the Life magazine spread, and so it's January 20th, 1961. So again, Michael and Pam. Michael's in Boulder, Colorado, in college. Pam's in Middlebury, and I think I just want to point out, and Tom does a great job of this, is like all of these girls, women are. This is a club reviewed for bigotry, right? So all of these essentially kids are now in a major publication, and you know, whether they had anything to do with this or not, most likely not. Now they are sort of brought into this fray and publicly shamed, and so it just, you know, it was more the sins of the parents than the kids, and they're sort of brought into this as well. Like they're dragged into this. And again, as we said before, here are Pam and Michael's pictures. They're in the magazine, even though they didn't come forward. They went skiing, I believe, right?
They went to a play on Broadway and then they went skiing.
And so, and then, like during the Hollywood. And so just sort of interesting again, the publicity is really important. We'll talk about that in a second, but that shaming is also really raw and really hard. No one likes to be, you know, corrected. No one likes to be brought out in the public for, you know, for whatever. I just got an email from my boss and it took me like 3 days because it was just a correction. No one likes it. Like that's really hard. And so, but sometimes it's necessary, right? Like, and so when to make that call, Father Kempsell made that call, there was certain ramification. There were certainly impacts on himself, on the church, on the community. So, you know, it's something to definitely consider. Okay, the next one. So some of these are from Jeff, but I just want to, so the impact on and Jeff, if you would like to contribute, we'd love to hear from you. So Father Kempsell and his family were sequestered, put in protective custody for 10 days. The FBI did get involved. They received death threats because of this stance. Eventually the vestry of St. James passed a resolution of support in March. In March 1961, even with that, two members, and again, this is 100% Tom's blog. This is, but even with that, two members were absent, one abstained. Many of the people of St. James were in support, but this was a public outing of this church. And again, even in this sermon, he's not mad at the club; he's mad at the members of his parish who are in support of this decision. And it really is bringing the parish into an unfavorable light and bringing attention that many didn't want, even though in theory they supported sort of the intention behind it. And then, just the lives and the relationships with the church, and even the community, and Jeff as a 10-year-old, right, kind of what happens to him out, his whole life is upended by this sermon, by this bold and courageous decision. And Father Kempsell really isn't the same in the church after this, and,
But he is in the community, he's made president of the Orchestral Society, and he is seen as an advocate for civil rights. He gives important talks, and he's kind of a celebrity in certain circles, and yet here it's different. And there is one fierce critic of Father Kempsell's actions, whose family was members and left. And they're also at the club. I'll leave them nameless, but what they said about the 81 members was a lot of money left the church. So I don't know, but that's what they said.
And that went to Joseph of Arimathea,
Yes,
is that
Joseph,
right? Yeah, so if you go to St. Joseph of Arimathea on Sawmill River Road, I think, I don't even think they worship every Sunday, it's so small, maybe Paul and Sharon know. But the people who left here poured money into that place in spite, and so there's some fancy stuff up there, there's just nobody in the pews, so it's kind of an interesting after story.
it's on the registry of historic
It
places. It's a
is.
protected
It is.
building, although no one's in the building. So yeah,
Yeah.
the members that did leave were very wealthy, very connected, and again, their protest was to sort of pledge as much as possible to this tiny church in White Plains. 81 members did rejoin, but they didn't have the connections, they didn't have the wealth, and that's really sort of under the auspices of eventually why the vestry did, separate, and you can talk about that in a little bit. Yes.
St. Joseph.
Got it, okay. On Sawmill
Up
Road
this
and
street.
Ardsley.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah, just.
I had Ardsley and the website, it said White Plains, I just changed it, but it's on Sawmill River Road heading up there. Thank you.
Next,
Sure.
I'll tell you if I have any hands.
Yeah, sure. And if anyone on Zoom wants to
Yeah,
participate, please jump in. So impact on Scarsdale, within 3 weeks, the president of the club came out publicly and was interviewed, and essentially they had a meeting and they came up with like a memo on their policy.
Yeah, it was a letter.
A letter stating essentially that all guests were welcome. So they did clarify that. So that's within 3 weeks. Jewish members were allowed to join the club, but I believe it was really only the most wealthy connected initially. And then Tom, you had an interesting anecdote there.
The whole reason I wrote this was I was 12 and I went to summer camp up in Maine, in Bridgeton, Maine. And a counselor named Eric Detler, whose family lived here in Scarsdale, and his father, Robert Detler, was a sociology professor at Columbia and then Boston University, and he was, yes. Oh, okay. So anyway, the Detlers are famous up in Massachusetts. Like, he's a big civil rights integration specialist. But Eric told me that club of yours used to turn people with Jewish names away from dances and stuff. And so I was 12. I went home and asked my parents, and they said, yeah, when we put your best friend's parents up for membership, we were warned by this lovely older couple down the street. Oh, don't recommend Judy for the club. She's Jewish, they won't want her. And so that to me as a 12-year-old, and I mean, I sort of came back to it when I became a high school teacher up in Lexington, Massachusetts. And I just started looking, we got the New York Times historical database, and they said it was just some work thing after work. We had to learn to use it. And they're just play around with it, put in some stuff, look it up. And I started putting in Scarsdale Golf Club, and this volleyball thing came up. So there I was.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this. I think it's uncanny parallels of what happened
years ago to where we are now. And then just in terms of the impact of, for me, what I'm taking from this is how the Episcopalian Church really, I think of it as a very inclusive, entity, and to know the history that even in the sixties in Scarsdale, when this was going on, that, he had the courage, to speak his truth. Obviously, there were consequences as a result of it. And so I'm thinking of like, and when I think of today, even Reverend Bud, and I'm not gonna get political, but, her speaking her truth at the inauguration, it makes me proud to be a part, of considering myself a Episcopalian faith. And I just wonder, this is rhetorical, not necessarily to put anyone on the spot, but kind of where we go from here, just in terms of what is going on in the world, not even the country, world right now, with how certain people or philosophies are thinking about disenfranchised groups. Disenfranchised groups, whether they have money or they don't. Yeah, so that's kind of what's in my mind now. I just want to say kudos. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trisha.
Thank you, Trish.
Mm.
So I just wanted to get back on, okay, so, so the club eventually did, and I think you said in Westchester Country, there was, after this, other country clubs had,
No, I mentioned the Western Country Club because, in the 1980s, my late first husband and I lived in the home on the grounds of the Westchester Country Club. And he had been given a country club membership by his company. And, he used it mostly for tennis, not we were friends with a lovely couple who lived across the street, not on the grounds of the club. Who were a Jewish couple, an older Jewish, they seemed older than me because I was in my 30s at the time.
oh,
My age. And my friend put their name up for membership in the country club. Bernard was born and raised in Paris and lived through the Nazi occupation of France. So, this is high on his list of priorities. Anyway, he was told to take the name off, to withdraw the name. So, unfortunately, he died of cancer a couple of years later. And when Paul and I married, the club originally, when Bernard died, put the membership in my name. Okay? But then when I told them that I was marrying Paul Clayton, they insisted that they had to put the membership in his name. He wasn't in the least bit interested in being a member. It had to be in his name. And by the way, he had to fill out this form where the maiden name of your grandmother was.
Oh.
I wrote a letter that I'm infamous for, apparently, taking great pride in telling them that my husband, Reverend Dr. Paul Clayton, and I put all his degrees after. And traced his family back to William the Conqueror. And it was, by the way, let's list all the initials, I put WASP. And no business whatsoever being a member of the club, so we left the club. I mean, it took me But my question is a serious question. How much of this is still going on? And that happened in the 1980s. And so what's still going on? I mean, we know what's going on with college campuses and everything, but
I don't have that answer. But that is something to think about, right? Where do we go from here? What is still going on? Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something to think about our, as members of the Episcopal Church, and yeah, I mean, it's easy to look back, but to actually, where do we go from here? Because it's really important. And I just, this is a quote from Nancy Roth, the wife of the choir director,
He's also the reverend, she became a.
Okay. But essentially the impact, you didn't want people to know you were from Scarsdale, a long time afterwards. I wouldn't let people know, where it was from. There was quite a stigma attached to it. And, Jean Peterson, who I believe is on here as well, she was, I think, 2 at the time. But as a young kid in the later 60s and even into the 70s, there was like a buzz here. The kids could feel it, the adults were sort of talking about it, like there was something that happened that no one really knew about, like the younger kids didn't know about. So it definitely was a lasting effect here as well, in the church. So I'll just go quickly. So I think the question is, right, why so public? And that's really, I think Tom, you talk about this in your blog as well, but like that's the sort of the big question here, right? Did Father Kempsell have to be quite so public? Did he need to have a press statement after, or could he just make a sermon and then dealt with it there? And you know, as a history teacher, and it immediately went back to the civil rights pilgrimage that we went on. As a church, I went with my wife and father-in-law and my son. We actually just jumped to this. Joanne Blackman Bland was the youngest involved in the first attempted Bloody Sunday. She was arrested at 8 years old. Her sister actually wrote a book called Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom. They were from Selma. What sort of struck me here in terms of publicity, she brought up the fact that Dr. King had only been in Selma for 5 nights total, right? So if you watch the movie Selma, it is centered around Dr. King and his speech and and that's just not really the reality. And what she pointed out was that, you know, what he brought was the 3 M's, she called it. She brought fundraising or money. He brought motivation. He had this incredible, I mean, all listen to it, but his way of speaking just compelled people to action. But he also brought the media. He brought with him the, you know, the Times. He brought with him the newscasts of the day where you would publicly show the wrongs that were going on. And you think about, like, you know, Bloody Sunday going over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, like, does that have any impact really without being broadcast on the news and seeing, you know, National Guard, you know, troops bashing in the heads of, you know, nonviolent protesters, right? Like, is that what's needed? And so, I mean, we can always go back and look and think, but I do think that publicity is really important, particularly in moving the needle. And when groups are very comfortable, often that you need to sort of kick that hornet's nest to enact and affect change. Father Kempsell, again, himself, we'll talk about this in a second, but it was, and this is also stolen directly from Tom's blog, but an American Dilemma talks about sort of the importance of, in the civil rights movement, the publicity as well. And Louise Clark does talk about it. That's really still the remnants of this. It's raw because it was so public. And did it have to be so public? And how many people were actually members of the church actually involved? And but the whole church was sort of now brought down and included in this sermon. Yes, Virginia.
I want to add a little something to that, which is sort of like what happens in Scarsdale does not stay in Scarsdale. That and particularly in this time period, Scarsdale, World War II, was the symbol of the epitome of the American dream, and it had a lot of press coverage on a variety of things. But I think that this kind of a situation was not unique to Scarsdale at all. But because it happened here, and because the New York Times is almost the local newspaper, but it's also the paper of record, it became a big national story. And Scarsdale, which was known for its so-called neighborliness, was revealed to be less than or more than neighborly. Yeah.
Thank you, Virginia. Next. So leaving some in to let So even though Father Kempsell sort of, and again, in certain circles, as Tom was saying, became sort of a heroic figure and was moved to the president of the Orchestral Society of Westchester. He spoke, he narrated the Copeland honoring of President Lincoln in the county center, which was a big news story at the time. It was the like a UN commission that a UN concert. And so there were a lot of things sort of going well, but that sort of festering and the tension in the church didn't go away. With those 81 members who were very influential while in leaving, there was anger and resentment about budget. If anyone's been on the vestry, like the endowment, these are things to talk about. These are things that are very important in Episcopal Church, more so than in like a Catholic church. But 4 members of the vestry, essentially the newly elected vestry, decided to meet and discuss essentially what they believed to be was deficit spending, which back then was a no-no. Now, you know, you can, but they essentially came out and said that they were gonna write a letter asking for more funds for the church. This was all done without communication with Father Kempsell. When he learned about this was a real betrayal of trust. And essentially, it came to a head where a vestry meeting, I was never on a vestry meeting this long, but it lasted until 12:45 a.m. And essentially they were at an impasse. They called the Bishop Donegan, and decided that, you know, the parish was unhappy with Father Kempsell's service, and they decided the bishop approved that he would move on. He'd find another place. And so Tom, you have some with the with the next with the
Wayne Schmidt. I mix up Wayne Schmidt and Wayne Kempton.
Schmidt, yeah.
But Wayne Schmidt was the new associate rector at the time, and so I got to interview him a couple of years after I wrote the thing. And he 2 important things. At the vestry meeting, he pointed out that they were making something that was spiritual and personal into a financial thing, and that was wrong. And I think that took a lot of guts. He was like just out of seminary. This was his first place. He was getting married. He was not like someone to have to take a stand against powerful vestry members, but he did, like he couldn't help it because he saw what was happening. But also something that wasn't in the notes is that they told Father Kempsell, you have to give up the Orchestral Society. You're too much time with that. You're not getting enough time. And that was like, they knew how important that was to him. It just was like kind of heartbreaking stuff.
Yes, John.
When you go back to the previous slide, why so public? You know, pulpits and beamers and churches and synagogues have long been used when a priest or a rabbi or a minister has had a conviction, that in order to get their conviction understood by the congregation, to activate them, to do something. It's very normal, and it's still being done today. A friend of mine just told me he attended with a friend in the South, and this Pentecostal church is preaching lily whiteism. Everybody, you know, we want a lily white America again. So we haven't moved very far from the 60s. Maybe in Scarsdale, maybe in Westchester, but we're a microcosm of what's really going on in America today. And there's some real concern, you know, to understand how to change the mindset of people that just are bigots and don't get it.
I see people, thank you, John. I see people going in, mindful of time. I want to make sure we know that the next of these is on May 4. And I was struck by what Trish said. You know, this doesn't look like the Episcopal Church that she joined a few years ago, right? I mean, some people, when they've joined very recently, they can't even believe this sort of waspy, you know, past was only in the 60s and 70s. And we've changed so much. Jeff is going to be talking about those decades and kind of where the Episcopal Church in St. James is headed or aspires to go. And so that'll be a talk that I think we'll all very much benefit from, and it'll piggyback on this quite a bit. Is that fair to say, Jeff, on May 4? I just gave you maybe additional,
Jeff will have the answers.
maybe I just broadened the scope of your talk, but.
So I think there's, let's
Mhm.
just see, I think one,
Mhm, that-
two, next one.
Yep.
Okay, so I do have a quote from a parishioner who was at the sermon at the time, who's now a reverend, if you do the next one, actually.
Next slide. Of course.
This is actually an interesting, it's a new sermon that came up, it's in Alabama, I believe, Birmingham, and essentially it's in a synagogue, and it's talking about the civil rights movement, and not looking at past like heroes or villains, but really looking at people in the periphery, and really have people today think about, right, what would you do? You know, what are you doing, and bring that up. And I think that goes to Trisha's comment about like, what, you know, where do we go from here? And so the headline is pretty easy to say who was right, who was wrong, but when you get deeper, it's more complicated. But I think really considering, like thinking through, you know, what are we doing about things that are happening? Are we speaking truth to power? Is that, you know, are we doing enough? I think that's really important. And then you can go.
That, I
back
think I
to,
opened a link, so.
Yeah, the next slide. And what struck me with Jeff, so Father Kempsell will actually went to Dallas. And Jeff has talked to Mother Esther just about being like a Yankee, being a carpetbagger. He was in the procession with JFK. He was supposed to give the prayer.
Like for luncheon for
and so it was a very large parish. He's, you know, has to be sort of, again, given the concept that the president had it shot and was dead. I mean, just really, it was a clash of cultures that didn't work out, and then they moved to was it Arvada?
Yeah.
Arvada, Colorado. And I just had a few, like, just remembering Father Kempsell. So this is the Reverend L. Paul Gratz, who was there at the time. This is 2021. This is again off of Tom's, like the comments on Tom's blog, I believe. But I remember Father K as my rector at St. James the Less, and the sermon he delivered and the courage it took to take a stand. So once again, I remember him as one of the saints in my life who bore witness and faced the pain after often associated with it. I know that moment helped to shape my life for the good. So this is a parishioner who did become a reverend. And then this is Carol Johnson from Colorado, just showing sort of again the impact that Father Kempsell did have when he did find sort of the right place. And this is a longtime parishioner. George French Kempsell was Man of the Year in Arvada. Whenever the police needed a minister, they called him. Everyone loved him. He was kind and generous and open to everyone. So I guess I wanted to pick a happy ending at the end, but like this courageous, this costly grace, this courageous stand upended the lives of the family, himself, and was really incredibly brave. I mean, just thinking as, you know, a man with 6 children, he is the sole provider, and he is going to go up head to head with some incredibly powerful, long-standing, entrenched, you know, members of his community. As a father myself, I mean, that's really, really powerful. So eventually they did find the right place. Our church, I think now is a very different church. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have, you know, there's a lot of problems to fix, but I think we can at least think about the example of George Kempsell and use it just for, you know, for inspiration going forward. Thank you for saying I just got to do that.
Add one more thing, during our lawsuit confession over time, and I wanted to say that the jets and the escorts in 1960 were really a product of the 50s. And things began to change after that. So I'm going to speak a little bit personally for a moment. I went to the high school and I graduated in 66. And I will tell you that all 4 years, the boys who asked me out were all blondes. Okay? And that was not unique. And this is a time that we remember that I didn't invite anybody out, because that was not the courtship etiquette. You had to wait to hear from a guy to invite you out. The other thing I want to say is that, when I was invited to the senior prom by Jimmy Stewart, who was the son of Jimmy Stewart of the Hitchcock Memorial Church, I came home and I was so excited, and I can't tell you who was more excited, myself or my mother. This is the best thing I ever had at the time, so get you a dress. So I think what I'm saying is that, and I wasn't unique, it was just it was a generational change that happened quickly. And I think that I remember growing up saying, what do you mean mixed marriage? What are you mixing? You know, I didn't understand what that meant as a racial concept. And our generation, I think, is the first generation that really began to change that.
Having Virginia and Tom here reminds me, was there anyone who's here that I didn't call out? Of course, Paul and Sharon are here and they have their memories of the Episcopal Church and their club from that time. Anyone else here of significant, who's in any way connected to this historically, or anything you wanted to add, Les? And
so much I think about it. Just love being here, love that, really honored being home. This is becoming to be part of this courageous church, a courageous church that wants to face this darkness in its mass and embrace it, not embrace it because you want to grow from it and learn from it. It's a very powerful religious message. That their happy ending, they're looking for happy ending, is that, Reverend Kempsell really had carried around this murder his life. He stood up at this moment, done that. He would have carried a much deeper burden if he had a person of his character. Obviously spent the rest of his life grateful for that burden rather than another, and that's something for us to, that doesn't sound like a happy ending, but it is. I tell you, as a clergy person in Westchester, it's not always easy to stand up and say to people, I think we all have some work to do here.
Yeah. And
people don't like to hear that, especially here. We know who we are. We're some new people. We're accomplished. This is a really important chapter for us to embrace. It's a very happy because it leads to new beginnings for all of us.
Thank you. I love that.
Yeah.
Yes, John.
I think the takeaway from this should be not afraid to fight for what you believe and stand up. If you see a wrong, try to right it in some ways. And I think that it's on the clergy to help us understand that, because we come here for spiritual nourishment. We come here to understand, what God's telling us to do in our hearts and in our lives. And as our spiritual leaders, our spiritual local leaders, the onus becomes on you to instruct us, to make it hard for us to not see the wrong. Yeah.
And I think the one happy ending is in this parish. I mean, yes, we have our challenges, but I have to look at Joseph of Arimathea, and not to tut here, but it didn't turn out too great for them. All those 80 or however many of those people became parishioners there. I mean, I think, as I said in my sermon introduction, this was really instrumental for us in becoming a church that could change and grow and be challenged and be what we are today, because we're quite we're a success story, not without our challenges, but in the larger picture of the Episcopal Church in this area, we're vibrant, we're doing well. We're, growing more and more diverse in lots of different ways. So that's a happy ending that to me really traces back to what he did in that pulpit and beyond.
Does anybody?
Anyone on Zoom wanna?
Does anybody, I've been watching Zoom people for hands and we have to wrap up, but does anybody on Zoom want to add anything? I'm so happy you all are here with us. I see Mary Ann, others are.
So I actually had a question, and this goes back, but somebody made a reference to the Committee of 10. And I'm trying to put this in context, from my experience, something I hadn't heard this sermon in 64 years, right? But I still remembered it. And when Father Kempsell kind of singled out some people, maybe not by name, I guess the idea was that there was a committee at the golf club that had done this and they were members of the church. Is that
Should I leave her with Tom? I want to, wait 1 second.
So there's just one
We have
second.
a couple of, I know folks have to go. We're at 1 o'clock. We're going to hold on to the online folks, but the rest of you I know have to leave, and we went a little over. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to thank John profusely. This was a lot of work and on top of a busy schedule as a dad and a teacher. So we're very, very grateful. Sure. And online people, hold on, because Tom and Virginia and John and I are going to be here with you and any others who stay.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. And to be continued, May 4, join us for our last lecture of the year, May 4, led by Jeff. Okay. Now, Sharon and Mary Ann.
This is Sharon Pedersen, and I was a parishioner at St. James until I went away to college at 79, so from like 71 to 79. And at this far remove, I don't know how much of this was a misunderstanding among my peers when I was in junior and senior year of high school, and how much is true. But I would be interested at some point to learn more, and this is not about St. James, but the Scarsdale Golf Club and when the racial barrier against Black people there was first broken. My dance school in the later years of high school would have like once or twice a year balls in addition to our regular classes that were elsewhere. My ballroom dance school, my social dancing school, I should say. And after one of those, I was told that Black people were not permitted as either members or even guests. And at the time there was an African-American, I think maybe Bishop Suffragan of New York, and the example was he would not have been permitted as a guest. And I don't know if this is true or not. I tried looking online a little bit to see if I could find out, and it seems like it was well after 79 that the Scarsdale Golf Club got its first Black member. Anyway, so I just don't know, and I don't want to cast aspersions on the club or the people of the time, but in connection with this discussion about discrimination and standing up for it, I find myself returning to that and wondering about it.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that because I'm not a member anymore. My parents moved in 81, so I don't know. I can't
Public
answer it.
history has whitewashes all of it.
Yeah.
You know, anything that's sort of printed out there. And I think unlike St. James, they are not confronting it in the same way as far as I know. I don't know, do you know when they admitted Jewish members?
Well, I know that by the 70s they did, but like that.
We have.
Okay.
What's your name?
My name is Gary Pollock. And there are a lot of Jewish members at Scarsdale Golf Club.
Yeah.
I've never felt discriminated or felt any negative vibes.
That's good. I'm not surprised now.
You know, the
Yeah.
club,
And we've
the
joined
club
one.
always looks for money and there's a lot of bar mitzvahs and Jewish weddings that take place as social events in the club. The club has a lot of Asian members, Chinese, Japanese, Indian. I taught a little bit of black.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
And I'm only been a member there for 2 years. I'm not sure how much I see the black members. So I'm just being honest as I can.
Did you live here when you were younger or did you?
No, I grew up in Brooklyn and I moved here in 1985.
Okay, so you've been here a while. So what made you think to decide to join the club 2 years ago?
I retired.
There you go. You went to play golf.
And I wanted to play more golf.
Uh-huh.
But I have Jewish friends who had been members, who sponsored me to get into these clubs. Who had been members for 20 years. Both were Jewish because as a Jewish boy grew up in Brooklyn, you hung out with Jewish people.
So you do know, and so do you know anyone who might like to take me around the club? I can't even get into the club to look at it because I don't know anybody.
I'll be happy to take you around the garden.
Sure.
Want to
have lunch?
Yeah.
Thank you.
How's that?
I just wanted to say a little, could talk a lot about, and it, mostly just affirm, but there's a lot to talk about here. Thank you, Les Brunson. Nedam Shalom. We're on the, thank you. Pleasure to meet you.
There were some politics.
We did a civil right, we went together to, yeah,
Gary?
Gary.
I'm trying to get 10 of them.
What, like?
to Montgomery and Birmingham, and Selma.
But I used.
We walked over that bridge together, the mother and I. We did. There must be a photograph of it somewhere.
Great. This is my husband Doug Jones. So there you go.
Nice to meet you.
Okay, so yeah.
So,
I'm ready.
So it's Gary.
We'll get there.
My middle initial.
Thank you. Thank
For
you.
white dot.
That's a big commitment.
R.
for me.
No, it's good. It's really worth it.
So to be continued, I'll
At
be.
Gmail.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, dot after the R.
Yes, Donna.
Next year is
Great.
not gonna be.
That's good.
Email.
Yeah.
Will.
And your name, please?
I'm
Great.
Virginia
Yeah.
Trackman.
Okay.
And I'm Virginia Trackman at Tufts.edu.
Okay, perfect.
But I'm totally,
Wonderful.
I'll send it to both of you.
Wonderful.
Why don't I get yours also?
Professor, thanks.
So we hold it.
Good to see you.
You want me to write it down?
got
Don't
it.
leave quite yet.
All right.
2 seconds.
Want me to write it down?
Yeah, write it down. What are you doing?
I just told them. The members trust the process. No discrimination.
Yeah, Popham Day, right?
Yeah. That's the question, where is it now, right? I just want to know.
I mean, this is.
Yeah.
Said, I mean, Jim Mullen was a couple of years, so was doing research
Yeah.
on her and that's.
Right. Yeah.
So it's really, so I mean, there are a lot of.
Yes. Well, right.
Okay.
Time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would invite you, but it's a fundraiser. so-
Yeah.
So like, they got me baptized here, is that right?
Right.
This wasn't anything, it was just a lot of. I know exactly. Yeah.
Different woman. And
I don't waste my dermatologist. This today.
Yeah, yeah.
But she said it went to us, but we.
And it's unlawful.
Cover that back or-
Well, they can also, yeah.
And I'm just, no, even, I'm doing.
95.
Yeah, it's great, Okay, I'm happy to be here. And I'm wondering what congregations. I'm just starting history.
So I can never go up.
Just the big one.
So after basically I gotta go to the synagogues and be like, what do you got? You know,
In the late nineties.
and there's no synagogue. They called me, the descendant was told me, the predecessor called me the Jewish Community Center, which was a 22, so it was the Salvation Army. Back to the building. And that was the first one.
Small
Mrs. White's Lane, it's both.
Christmas,
That
which
was
happens in this
the-
spaces like this.
Number two, we did.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we got